Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, be sure to drop your thoughts, feelings, and lessons in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's get into it. Calvin Ransom and Renee Whitfield were Black Americans living in Philadelphia. Calvin Ransom had a habit of tracking details the way other people tracked weather, because numbers never lied unless someone made them. He worked as a senior financial analyst at Grayson, Pike & Monroe, where his job was to notice patterns that did not belong. 6 months ago, Renee Whitfield's spending began to shift in a way that did not match 8 years of marriage. It started with small charges, then larger ones, then cash withdrawals in round numbers. Calvin Ransom watched quietly and wrote everything down. On a Friday in late September, Renee Whitfield came home later than usual and carried herself like she had rehearsed the moment in the car. Her lipstick was slightly smeared, not destroyed, just altered enough to be noticed by someone who studied changes. She dropped her purse on the kitchen counter harder than normal, poured a heavy glass of wine, and stared at Calvin Ransom across the granite island. "We need to talk," Renee Whitfield said, her tone sharp and practiced. Calvin Ransom looked up from his laptop without surprise. He closed it slowly, set it aside, and waited like he was listening to a report. "About us," Renee Whitfield continued. "About this marriage." She drank again, the kind of sip meant to create courage, then exhaled with a tight jaw. "Calvin, I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time." Calvin Ransom nodded once, still calm, still steady, as if her words were an overdue forecast. Renee Whitfield seemed irritated by his composure, like she wanted resistance to confirm her story of being trapped. "Go on," he said quietly. Renee Whitfield's eyes hardened. "I've been seeing someone for 6 months, and last night I slept with my ex, Darian Knox." The confession hung in the air. Renee Whitfield stared at Calvin Ransom as if waiting for a crash, a storm, an outburst she could point to later. Instead, Calvin Ransom stood, walked to his home office, and opened the door with the same precision he used at work. Renee Whitfield followed him, voice rising with confusion. "Did you hear me?" she demanded. "I cheated. I've been cheating." Calvin Ransom opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder, prepared weeks earlier. He sat on the desk and looked at her. "Congratulations," he said. Renee Whitfield laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "Are you in shock?" Calvin Ransom's expression remained neutral. "No, I'm congratulating you on finding something you call love. Love, apparently, has a price." He opened the folder, not rushing, not hesitating. "I calculated the cost." Renee Whitfield's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" Calvin Ransom slid out a spreadsheet with color-coded columns and highlighted cells. "This is an itemized list of every expense tied to your relationship with Darian Knox," he said. "Dinners, hotels, gifts, ride shares, and purchases you labeled as something else." He turned the page like a man presenting evidence in a meeting. "Here are hotel charges listed as spa visits," Calvin Ransom said. "Here are boutique purchases, and here are the cash withdrawals, always in round numbers." Renee Whitfield's face tightened as she recognized entries. Calvin Ransom continued, voice steady. "Here is the timeline cross-referenced with messages stored in our shared cloud account. Here is location data showing visits to Darian Knox's apartment near Rittenhouse Square. Here are photographs from a licensed investigator I hired in July." He placed the photos down in a neat stack. "Everything is dated and documented. The total is $89,847.32. We can round it to $90,000 for simplicity." Renee Whitfield's wine glass trembled. "You cannot be serious," she said, her voice shifting from bold to strained. Calvin Ransom did not raise his voice. "I'm serious about money," he said. "You know that." He pulled out another packet. "These are divorce papers. I signed them." Renee Whitfield's anger surged, trying to reclaim control. "You cannot charge me for cheating," she snapped. "That is not how divorce works." Calvin Ransom's mouth formed a thin, mechanical smile. "You are correct. The invoice is symbolic. The asset division is not." He slid forward the next set of documents with calm certainty. Renee Whitfield snatched the papers, sloshing wine close to the rim. Her eyes scanned quickly, then slowed. Confusion replaced confidence. Then fear began to appear, small and undeniable. "What is this?" she whispered. Calvin Ransom leaned back, as if observing a predictable result. "That is the deed to our house," he said. "My house now. Transferred to my sole ownership 3 months ago." Renee Whitfield shook her head hard. "I never signed that." Calvin Ransom's gaze stayed fixed. "You did," he said. "In June, when I asked you to sign a refinancing package. You signed 12 pages while watching television." Renee Whitfield flipped through more. Her breathing became shallow. She saw car titles, account restructures, and signatures that looked like hers. "This is not legal," she said, voice cracking. "You tricked me." Calvin Ransom's tone did not shift. "No one forced you," he said. "Everything is notarized and witnessed." He pointed to a page. "The BMW titled transferred to my name in July. You signed it thinking it was an insurance update." He pointed to another. "The joint investment portfolio was dissolved and redistributed into individual accounts in August. You authorized it when I said it was for tax efficiency." He tapped the last. "Savings moved to a secured account in my name. You signed." Renee Whitfield's legs gave way, and she collapsed into a leather chair in the corner. "I will sue you," she said, forcing the words through panic. "Fraud, forgery." Calvin Ransom's eyes did not soften. "Please do," he said. "Your attorney will tell you the same thing. Your signature matches. Witnesses exist. You signed freely because you trusted me." He paused, then added, "You did not read." Renee Whitfield stared at him, stunned by the quiet cruelty of the truth. Calvin Ransom opened another folder, thicker than the first. "Now," he said, "let's talk about what your life looks like starting tomorrow." Calvin Ransom spoke like he was outlining a financial forecast. "You will wake up in this house," he said. "My house. You will be here as a guest. You have 30 days to vacate per the agreement." He slid bank statements forward. "You will check the accounts and see our joint checking has $3,000. That is yours. That represents the amount tied to your part-time income contributions." Renee Whitfield's mouth opened, then closed. Calvin Ransom continued. "The remainder of marital funds are allocated as documented and legally supported. My salary funded 94% of marital assets. I can prove it." Renee Whitfield's eyes darted to one line item. "My mother's inheritance," she said. 40,000. Calvin Ransom nodded. "Yes," he said. "The inheritance from 2 years ago, which you deposited into our joint investment account." He looked at her without warmth. "You commingled with it without a postnuptial agreement protecting it. In this state, commingled inheritance becomes marital property." Renee Whitfield's face tightened as she realized she had done it casually, thinking it did not matter. Calvin Ransom pulled out the prenuptial agreement. "This was signed before our wedding," he said. "The provisions are clear. In cases of proven infidelity, the primary earner retains a heavy share. You signed it at our rehearsal dinner." He did not add anything else. The paper said enough. Renee Whitfield's voice shook. "You planned this," she said, accusing him like it was a crime. Calvin Ransom answered with a number. 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, he said. "Since the first hotel charge that did not align with your story." He sat across from her and for the first time allowed a crack of emotion. "Did you think I would not notice?" he asked. "You married someone who finds patterns for a living." Renee Whitfield wiped her face, tears mixing with humiliation. "Why didn't you confront me?" she asked, desperate for any answer that sounded less horrifying. Calvin Ransom leaned forward. "Because I needed proof," he said, "and I needed protection." His eyes hardened again. "The worst part was watching you lie daily." Calvin Ransom's voice lowered, controlled but edged. "I watched you kiss me goodbye and then go to him," he said. "I listened to stories you invented. I watched you become someone wearing my wife's face." Renee Whitfield's shoulders shook. "So what now?" she whispered. "You took everything." Calvin Ransom stood, calm, returning like a mask. "Not everything," he said. "You still have your job at a marketing firm. You still have your clothes and personal items. I'm not taking jewelry that belongs to your family." Renee Whitfield looked up, face blotchy. "You left me with nothing," she said. Calvin Ransom answered simply, I left you with what you brought into the marriage, plus $3,000. Calvin Ransom paused, then opened his phone and showed an email draft. And about the $90,000 invoice, he said, I am waiving it. Consider it retroactively forgiven. Renee Whitfield's mouth trembled. So you're satisfied, she said, trying to find the end of the knife. Calvin Ransom's smile returned, colder. Not yet, he said. There's one more thing. Renee Whitfield's voice rose with fear. What else can you take? Calvin Ransom answered without theatrics. Darian Knox's career, he said. But that is tomorrow's discussion. Tonight, call him. Tell him what happened. See if he still wants you when the money and assets are gone. If it is true love, it should survive hardship. He turned toward the door and added, I'm staying at a Marriott downtown. Movers come Tuesday. Storage is paid for 6 months. Renee Whitfield sat frozen as Calvin Ransom left. Papers lay around her like debris after a controlled demolition. Her phone buzzed. A text from Darian Knox read, Tomorrow night. Can't wait. Renee Whitfield stared at the message, then at the divorce papers, then at the empty doorway. She understood, for the first time, what it meant to be dismantled by someone who treated emotion like math. Saturday arrived with clear sunlight that felt insulting. Renee Whitfield had not slept. She spent the night scrolling through accounts, staring at balances, and calling Darian Knox 17 times. He did not answer. At dawn, she shifted from denial to panic planning. At 8 in the morning, she called an attorney named Talia Mercado. Talia Mercado agreed to an emergency weekend consultation after Renee Whitfield said, My husband took everything. By 10, Renee Whitfield sat in a downtown Philadelphia office with Calvin Ransom's folder spread across a polished desk. Talia Mercado read in silence. Her expression tightened page by page. Well, Renee Whitfield demanded, Tell me we can destroy him. Tell me it's a fraud. Talia Mercado removed her glasses slowly. Renee, she said, this will be hard to hear. Your husband is not sloppy. Every transfer is legal. Every signature is yours. Everything is notarized and witnessed. He did not steal. You signed. Renee Whitfield clenched her jaw. He tricked me, she insisted. Talia Mercado's tone stayed professional. Or you did not read what you were signing, she said. I've seen this before. One spouse trusts and signs. The other plans. Renee Whitfield felt the room tilt. There has to be something, she said. The prenup. I had champagne. Talia Mercado shook her head. Having champagne at a celebratory dinner does not void a contract, she said. You are not incapacitated. You are not coerced. Renee Whitfield's throat tightened. So I get nothing, she said. Talia Mercado answered with the law. You get what the agreement stipulates in infidelity circumstances, she said. And he can prove infidelity. Talia Mercado lifted the investigator's photographs. These are detailed, she said. Dates, times, locations, messages, receipts. Renee Whitfield stared at herself in the photos and felt nauseated. Talia Mercado continued. In the event of proven infidelity, the innocent spouse retains what they brought in plus 60% of shared marital assets. Your husband contributed 94% of the income. You are walking away with minimal funds and personal property. Renee Whitfield's phone buzzed. Darian Knox was calling. She answered instantly, voice breaking. Darian, thank God. I need you. Everything is falling apart. Darian Knox's voice sounded formal, not tender. We need to talk, he said. I got an email this morning that changes things. Renee Whitfield's blood went cold. What email? She asked. Darian Knox hesitated. From someone claiming to be your husband, he said. Is it true you're married? You told me you were separated. Renee Whitfield tried to breathe. I'm almost divorced, she said quickly. Darian Knox's voice hardened. The email has photos, he said. You were at your house with him 2 weeks ago. You kissed him goodbye at the front door. You're wearing the necklace I bought you. Renee Whitfield's stomach dropped. He's spying, she said. Darian Knox cut her off. The email also included information about my employer's ethics rules, he said, and that I'm up for senior promotion next month. This could destroy my career. Renee Whitfield whispered. He took everything from me too. Darian Knox replied flatly. You lied. I can't be part of this. Then he ended the call. Renee Whitfield sat in the attorney's office, holding her phone like it was broken. Talia Mercado pretended not to have listened, but her eyes made it clear she heard enough. He sent information to Darian, Renee said, voice hollow. Talia Mercado corrected carefully. It sounds like he sent information to Darian, she said. What Darian does with it is Darian's choice. But your husband is escalating. Renee Whitfield swallowed. Phase 2, she said, remembering Calvin Ransom's words. Talia Mercado gathered the papers. Here's my advice, she said. Sign the divorce. Take the money in the joint account. Take your personal items. Move on before it gets worse. People who plan like this don't stop at phase 1. Renee Whitfield left the office in a haze. She sat in the BMW, now fully aware it was not hers, and scrolled through her contacts. Her parents had always admired Calvin Ransom's stability. Her friends were mostly wives of his colleagues, relationships built on proximity, not loyalty. Her sister, Jana Whitfield, had warned her years ago not to marry someone so structured without understanding the structure would apply to her too. Renee Whitfield had nowhere to go that felt safe. Her phone buzzed with an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Consider this a courtesy." Against her instincts, she opened it. Inside was a link to a shared folder. Against every warning in her body, she clicked. The folder contained files labeled with dates and times. Videos, audio, photos, screenshots, everything that proved her affair, cataloged like a case file. At the bottom sat a text document titled Read Me. Renee Whitfield opened it and felt her pulse spike. Renee, it began, these files are private and will remain private if you sign the divorce papers without contest and vacate within 30 days. If you fight, these will be shared with Darian's employer, your employer, our mutual friends, and our families. The message ended with, you have 48 hours. The choice is yours. Calvin. Renee Whitfield dropped the phone. The threat was clean, quiet, and absolute. She realized she no longer had choices, only consequences. Sunday evening arrived with Renee Whitfield still in the house, surrounded by 8 years of memories that now felt like evidence against her. The divorce papers lay untouched on the coffee table. Calvin Ransom's 48-hour deadline ticked down like a silent device. Renee Whitfield called her mother. Her mother's voice turned cold when she learned the affair was real. You made your bed, her mother said. Renee Whitfield called Jana Whitfield. Jana offered a couch, but refused to pretend Renee had been wronged. I told you he was calculating, Jana said. You thought it meant safe. It also means prepared. The silence from Darian Knox was worse. 3 days, no reply. Then he blocked her. The man she risked everything for vanished when risk became personal. At 8 that night, the doorbell rang. Renee Whitfield jolted. Through the window, she saw Calvin Ransom's BMW parked in the driveway. She corrected herself immediately. Calvin Ransom's BMW. She opened the door and found him standing there in pressed weekend clothes and neutral expression. He looked like he was arriving for a meeting. May I come in? He asked politely, like a guest. Renee Whitfield stepped aside without speaking. Calvin Ransom entered, glanced at the unsigned papers, and allowed a small, controlled smile. 16 hours remaining, he said. I thought we might talk before your deadline. Renee Whitfield's voice trembled. What else is there? She asked. You already took everything. Calvin Ransom sat in an armchair and looked at her. Not everything, he said. Not yet. Then he asked, why do you think I waited 6 months? Renee Whitfield sank onto the couch, drained. Because you needed time to take assets, she said. Calvin Ransom shook his head once. No, he said. I needed time to understand why you chose this. He leaned forward and the mask slipped briefly. You could have left, he said. You could have told me 6 months ago you wanted a divorce. I would have been hurt, but I would have been fair. Instead, you lied daily. You took marital money and used it on hotels with another man. You kissed me goodbye and drove to him. You made me the fool. His voice rose slightly, not wild but cracked. I worked 60-hour weeks for years, so you could work part-time and chase interests. I never controlled you. I asked for honesty. Renee Whitfield cried silently. I'm sorry, she said. Calvin Ransom's eyes stayed hard. Are you sorry, he asked, or sorry you got caught? Calvin Ransom pulled out his phone. I want to show you something, he said. A message you sent to Darian 3 months ago. Renee Whitfield felt her stomach twist. Calvin Ransom read aloud without emotion. Calvin's working late again tomorrow. We can have the whole afternoon. I can't wait until I leave him, but I need to be smart. Make sure I get half of everything first. My lawyer friend said I should wait until the 10-year mark for a better settlement. 2 more years of pretending. Renee Whitfield's face drained. She remembered writing it, but had buried it under pleasure and denial. Calvin Ransom pocketed the phone. That text changed everything, he said. Up until then, I was heartbroken. After that, I became clinical. Renee Whitfield tried to speak, but words failed. Calvin Ransom continued, voice eerily even. You were not only cheating, he said. You were strategizing. You planned to use me for 2 more years, take half my assets, and leave. Renee Whitfield shook her head, desperate. It was venting, she said. I didn't mean it. Calvin Ransom stared at her. You meant it when you typed it, he said. That was the moment you stopped being my wife and became a liability to mitigate. He stood and walked to the window like he was, observing a city that would go on without them. I spent 6 months turning myself into the person you probably described to him, he said. Calculating. Cold. Efficient. He turned back. I wasn't born that way. You made me. Renee Whitfield whispered. So what now? Calvin Ransom answered. Now you choose what remains private and what becomes public. Calvin Ransom moved toward the door. Sign the papers and leave quietly, he said. Take the $3,000 in personal belongings. I keep everything private. Our families believe we grew apart. Your reputation remains intact. Darian's career remains intact. Renee Whitfield swallowed hard. And if I don't sign? Calvin Ransom's expression did not change. Tomorrow at noon, I will send a comprehensive email to a long list, he said. Your parents will see videos. Your employer will receive documentation of sick days used for meetings. Darian's employer will receive a dossier, including expense report irregularities, including company funds used for hotel charges. Renee Whitfield felt sick. You would destroy him, she said. Calvin Ransom replied. He chose to pursue a married woman. He chose to use company money. Those are consequences. He paused, then added, but I will offer you something you never offered me. Choice. He said, sign and I will send him a warning that audits are coming, so he can clean his records. Renee Whitfield looked up, stunned. Why would you do that? Calvin Ransom said, because I am not a monster. Then he left, soft door closed, hard silence. Renee Whitfield sat alone with the papers and the countdown. She imagined the email hitting her mother's inbox. She imagined her father seeing videos. She imagined coworkers watching clips. She imagined Darian Knox's promotion evaporating. She imagined her own job turning cold and silent around her. She tried calling Jana Whitfield again, but Jana did not answer immediately. Renee Whitfield stared at the ceiling and saw the last 6 months replayed like a file list, each like an entry. She finally understood that Calvin Ransom's revenge was not loud. It was built like a contract. At 11:47 the next morning, 13 minutes before noon, Renee Whitfield signed every page with shaking hands. She scanned the documents and emailed them to Calvin Ransom as instructed. 3 minutes later, Calvin Ransom replied with one word, received. Then a second message arrived. You will find $5,000 deposited for first and last month's rent somewhere new, he wrote. Movers arrive tomorrow at 9. Goodbye. Renee Whitfield stared at the extra money and felt a new kind of shame. It was not a relief. It was the realization that even now, he was controlling the narrative, proving he could be strict without being reckless. The deposit hit her account. She saw the number and understood the cruelty of it. He did not have to help her. He did not owe her kindness. Yet he offered it anyway, and that made her betrayal feel heavier because it showed she had been given more grace than she deserved. 3 months later, Calvin Ransom sat in his home office in Philadelphia reviewing quarterly statements. The house felt quiet, clean, and purposeful again, like a space reclaimed. His phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against his usual rules, he answered. A woman's voice sounded professional and cautious. "Mr. Ransom," she said, "this is Yolanda Kendrick, attorney for Renee Whitfield. She has reverted to her maiden name." Calvin Ransom set down his pen. "Our legal matters are settled," he said. Yolanda Kendrick paused. "They are," she said. "This is not about that." Another pause. "She is pregnant," Yolanda Kendrick said. "Darian Knox is the father. He is denying paternity and has cut contact." Calvin Ransom felt no shock, only recognition of probability becoming reality. "Why are you calling?" he asked. Yolanda Kendrick spoke carefully. "She wanted you to know you were right about him," she said. "She's working 2 jobs, living in a studio in Camden, preparing to raise the child alone. She's not asking you for help. She wanted you to know she understands what she threw away." Calvin Ransom's face remained still. "Noted," he said. Yolanda Kendrick continued. "She also asked me to tell you she is sorry for treating you like a resource instead of a person." She referenced the message about waiting for the 10-year mark. Calvin Ransom exhaled once. "Tell her I wish her well," he said. "I hope she becomes a good mother and learns from this. I'm not interested in further contact." After the call ended, Calvin Ransom sat quietly. The information landed without drama, like a receipt placed on a desk. Consequences did not need applause. They simply arrived. That afternoon, Calvin Ransom opened his banking app and made an anonymous $5,000 donation to a pregnancy support center in Philadelphia that helped women facing single parenthood. He did not attach a note. He did not ask to know where it went. He did not look for Renee Whitfield's name. He did it because the child was real and because he refused to let bitterness dictate every action. That evening, at dinner with colleagues in Center City, someone asked if he was dating again. Calvin Ransom answered honestly. "A few coffee dates," he said. "Nothing serious." The conversation moved on. He noticed, with mild surprise, that he did not feel hollow. He felt lighter than he had in months. Driving home, Calvin Ransom replayed the last 9 months like a ledger. He wondered, sometimes, whether his planning had gone too far, whether the precision had cut into his own humanity. But then he remembered the message Renee Whitfield wrote in their bed, next to him, about pretending for 2 more years and taking half. He remembered the calm greed hidden inside casual words. He remembered the feeling of being treated as a tool. Calvin Ransom did not feel pleasure about her pain. He felt relief that he was no longer exposed to it. His phone buzzed. A text from a woman named Sienna Brooks, someone he met at a professional networking event. "Still on for coffee Thursday," she wrote. "Fair warning, I'm terrible at small talk, but great at arguing fiscal policy." Calvin Ransom smiled. Genuine. "Thursday works," he replied. "Also, fair warning, I'm excellent at arguing about everything, but I'm working on the human stuff." Sienna Brooks responded, "Aren't we all?" Calvin Ransom drove home with a quiet sense of moving forward. That night, Calvin Ransom made a decision that felt final. He opened his laptop, went to the secure folder where he had kept 8 months of documentation, and stared at the directory of files. The folder had once felt like armor. Now it felt like weight. He selected everything and deleted it. He emptied the trash. He unplugged the backup drive and fed it into a shredder he had purchased for work-grade security. The grinding sound filled the room. Physical copies went through next. Page after page, photos and printouts reduced to strips. When the last piece disappeared, Calvin Ransom stood there and felt something unfamiliar in recent months: quiet freedom. He understood he had kept his word. Renee Whitfield signed. He kept everything private, but he also understood something else. Keeping the files meant keeping a tether to anger. He did not need that tether anymore. Calvin Ransom turned off the office lights and walked upstairs. The house felt like a space he could live in, not defend. He thought about the lesson he had learned. Protecting himself did not require cruelty, only boundaries. He had drawn them late, but he had drawn them clearly. He thought about Renee Whitfield, now in a studio apartment in Camden, hand on her belly, facing a future that would not be softened by fantasies. He thought about Darian Knox, running from responsibility the moment it had consequences. Calvin Ransom did not celebrate either of their suffering. He simply acknowledged it. Some choices came with bills. Some bills arrived without negotiation. The cost of betrayal was not always money. Often it was time, trust, and the life that could have existed. That was the part no spreadsheet captured. Monday morning arrived with movers and boxes and the clinical efficiency Calvin Ransom had paid for. Renee Whitfield walked through rooms packing personal items with shaking hands. She did not linger. She did not argue. Every time she touched something shared, she remembered it was no longer shared. She packed clothes, shoes, family photos, and jewelry her mother had given her. She avoided the office. She avoided the kitchen where she had confessed. She avoided the couch where she had begged for excuses. Calvin Ransom did not show up. He communicated through email, clear and brief. He sent the storage unit address. He sent the lease end date notice. He sent one final reminder that the move-out window was 30 days, but he was allowing her to finish in 10. Renee Whitfield understood he was being generous in the same cold way a system could be generous. It still hurts. Renee Whitfield moved into a small apartment in Camden that smelled like fresh paint and cheap carpet. She sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, and stared at the blank walls. The silence felt different than the silence in the house. There, silence felt like being watched. Here, silence felt like emptiness she had earned. Her phone remained quiet. Darian Knox did not call. Friends did not appear. Her parents sent one short message. "We hope you get help." Jana Whitfield showed up with groceries and a stern face. "Eat," Jana said, setting bags on the counter. Renee Whitfield tried to apologize again, but Jana cut her off. "Stop trying to get comfort for what you did," Jana said. "If you want redemption, build it in private. Get to work." Renee Whitfield nodded, crying without noise. It was the first advice that felt real. At her marketing firm in Philadelphia, Renee Whitfield returned to work with a forced steadiness. She smiled at co-workers, but she felt every glance, every imagined whisper. Calvin Ransom had kept his materials private as promised, but the absence of him still changed how people looked at her. Some colleagues knew they had separated. They did not know why. She told a clean story. "We grew apart." It tasted like another lie, but it was the only protection she had left. She worked longer hours, hoping performance could drown shame. In the evenings, she studied budgets and rent listings and childcare costs, as if numbers could give her back stability. They could not. Yet she learned quickly that numbers were not cruel. They were honest. The cruelty had been in her choices, and she could no longer hide from that. Calvin Ransom, meanwhile, moved through his life with structure. He attended meetings, reviewed reports, argued calmly about forecasts, and kept his personal life unspoken. His colleagues knew he was divorced, but he did not give them details. His home felt quieter, but it also felt clean. When he had coffee with Sienna Brooks on Thursday, he arrived early, ordered black coffee, and sat in a corner where he could see the entrance. Sienna Brooks arrived on time, wearing a simple blazer and an expression that looked like curiosity mixed with caution. "So," she said, sitting down, "are you really terrible at small talk?" Calvin Ransom answered honestly. "I'm functional," he said, "but I prefer direct conversation." Sienna Brooks smiled slightly. "Then tell me something real," she said. Calvin Ransom hesitated, then chose a safe truth. "I'm rebuilding," he said, quietly. Sienna Brooks nodded. "That's a respectable project," she said. They talked about fiscal policy, then work, then books. Calvin Ransom noticed that his shoulders stayed relaxed. Weeks passed. Renee Whitfield kept her head down. She took on extra freelance marketing jobs. She learned to stretch money and live without the comfort she used to treat as guaranteed. She walked past restaurants she once visited with Darian Knox and felt sick, not because she missed him, but because she remembered how easily she had traded her marriage for attention. She sometimes typed messages to Calvin Ransom, then deleted them before sending. She understood that apology was not currency that bought forgiveness. It was merely an acknowledgement. On nights when loneliness hit hardest, she opened her bank app and stared at the balances, remembering the way Calvin Ransom had mapped her spending like evidence. She found herself becoming hyper-aware of small purchases, the way he had always been. She hated that she had learned this lesson through destruction, but she could not deny she was learning. It was an education paid in pieces of her own life. One afternoon, Renee Whitfield saw Darian Knox across a street in Philadelphia, exiting a building and speaking into his phone with urgent gestures. He looked thinner, his confidence less polished. She froze, heart racing. He did not see her. She watched him get into a rideshare and disappear. The sight left her shaken and strangely relieved. It confirmed what she already knew. The fantasy version of him had never been real. Only the consequences were real. That evening, Jana Whitfield called. "I heard through someone," Jana said carefully, "that Darian had workplace trouble. He moved." Renee Whitfield closed her eyes. "He vanished," she said. Jana's voice hardened. "That's who you chose," Jana replied. "Stop romanticizing it." Renee Whitfield whispered, "I'm not." Jana paused, then softened slightly. "Then keep going," Jana said. "Work, save, build something that does not depend on anyone else." Renee Whitfield stared at her wall after the call and realized she had no other option. She had already lost the life that depended on Calvin Ransom. Now she had to create a life that depended on her. Calvin Ransom continued seeing Sienna Brooks occasionally. They met for coffee, then dinner, then a museum visit. The relationship moved slowly, not dramatic, not desperate. Calvin Ransom told her he valued honesty more than charm. Sienna Brooks told him she valued stability more than promises. One night in late December, after dinner near Old City, Sienna Brooks looked at him across the table. "Do you ever worry you're too calculated?" she asked. Calvin Ransom did not flinch. He answered carefully. "I worry I became less human when I had to protect myself," he said. Sienna Brooks nodded, like she understood the language of guardedness. "Protection is not the same as punishment," she said. Calvin Ransom stared at his glass, thinking. "I try to keep the line," he said. Sienna Brooks replied quietly. "Then keep choosing the line." Calvin Ransom felt something loosen inside him. Renee Whitfield's pregnancy began to show. She wore looser clothing and walked slower. She avoided places where she might run into anyone connected to Calvin Ransom. She did not want pity. She did not want judgment. She wanted survival. At a clinic in Camden, she filled out forms alone, signed papers alone, and stared at ultrasound images with a numbness that felt like shock. She was becoming someone else, not because she wanted transformation, but because she had no choice. She worked 2 jobs and saved what she could. Some nights, she ate crackers and peanut butter and told herself it was temporary. Other nights, she cried quietly, remembering a house with granite countertops and a husband who once looked at her like she mattered. She stopped blaming him. She could not afford that lie anymore. She could not afford any lie. She began telling herself the truth with the same cold precision Calvin Ransom had used on her. She had done this. She had created this. And now she had to live it. In February, Renee Whitfield received paperwork confirming Darian Knox had relocated to Seattle and filed a notice through a lawyer denying paternity until a test was conducted. The letter felt like another door closing. She showed it to Yolanda Kendrick, who explained the process in clean terms. Renee Whitfield listened, numb. After the meeting, she walked outside into the cold air and stared at passing cars. She thought about Calvin Ransom warning her to see if Darian Knox loved her without money. She understood now that Darian Knox had never loved her at all. He had loved what she represented: secrecy, excitement, escape, and risk without consequences. The moment consequences appeared, he ran. Renee Whitfield went home and wrote down monthly expenses in a notebook, calculating how to afford childcare. She had become what Calvin Ransom always was, a person who planned. The difference was that his planning had protected him from destruction. Hers had come after destruction, in an attempt to survive it. Calvin Ransom received no more calls from attorneys. He heard nothing else about Renee Whitfield. He did not ask. When he thought about the past, he forced himself to remember the facts rather than the nostalgia. He remembered the message about waiting for the 10-year mark. He remembered the lies. He remembered the way she looked at him on that Friday night, expecting him to beg. He had not begged. He had protected himself. On a Sunday afternoon, he cleaned his home office and found an old photo of their wedding in a drawer. He held it for a moment, then placed it in a small box marked archive. He did not destroy it. He did not display it. He simply stored it away like a closed account. He understood that pretending the marriage never happened would be another lie. It had happened. It mattered. It had ended. That was the truth. And he had finally learned to live by truth again. In March, Sienna Brooks invited Calvin Ransom to meet her friends at a quiet dinner in King of Prussia. Calvin Ransom agreed, aware it was a step he once would have avoided. At the dinner, someone casually asked, "What happened in your last marriage?" Calvin Ransom paused, then answered with a boundary. "It ended because honesty ended," he said. "No more. No details." The table accepted the answer and moved on. On the drive home, Sienna Brooks glanced at him. "You handle that well," she said. Calvin Ransom nodded. "I'm learning," he said. Sienna Brooks smiled. "Good," she replied, "because life keeps asking questions." Calvin Ransom looked at the road and felt steady. The past no longer controlled his present. It existed behind him like a completed ledger. He had closed the books. Renee Whitfield continued working, continued saving, continued building a small life in Camden. Her parents remained distant, but occasionally sent messages about doctor visits. Jana Whitfield remained the most present person in her life, offering practical help without emotional rescue. Renee Whitfield learned to accept that. She learned to accept that support could be firm and still be support. One evening, sitting at her small kitchen table, Renee Whitfield wrote a letter to Calvin Ransom on paper. She wrote that she understood she had treated him like a resource. She wrote that she remembered the message about waiting 2 more years. She wrote that she now understood the cost was not money, but character. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask for contact. She sealed the letter, addressed it, then stared at it for an hour. Then she tore it into pieces and threw it away. She understood that apologizing to relieve herself would still be selfish. She had to live with what she had done without demanding comfort. That was part of the bill. In April, Renee Whitfield gave birth at a hospital in Camden. Jana Whitfield sat in the waiting room, stern and present. Renee Whitfield held her baby and felt fear and love collide in her chest. The child's face looked innocent, untouched by the chaos that created the circumstances. Renee Whitfield named the baby Niles Whitfield, giving the child her own last name. She did not send notices to Darian Knox. Yolanda Kendrick handled legal steps. Renee Whitfield focused on learning how to feed, soothe, and hold a life that depended entirely on her. In quiet moments, she looked at Niles Whitfield and felt a bitter gratitude that the child existed outside her mistakes, even though the child was born from them. She promised herself one thing. Niles Whitfield would not grow up watching her lie. She would not repeat the pattern. She would not build a life on deception again. That promise felt heavier than any contract because it required daily work. But she meant it. Calvin Ransom spent the spring focusing on his work and his steady relationship with Sienna Brooks. He did not talk about Renee Whitfield, but sometimes a memory surfaced unexpectedly. Renee laughing in the kitchen years ago, Renee dancing at a party, Renee asleep with a book on her chest. Calvin Ransom did not let those images rewrite the ending. He understood people could contain both tenderness and betrayal. He understood love could exist and still be broken. One evening, he and Sienna Brooks sat on his porch with coffee. She asked, "Do you ever feel guilty?" Calvin Ransom looked at the streetlights and answered honestly. "Sometimes," he said, "not for protecting myself, for how cold I had to become to do it." Sienna Brooks nodded. "Coldness is a tool," she said, "but you don't have to keep holding it." Calvin Ransom breathed out slowly. "I've been letting it go," he said. Sienna Brooks reached across the table and squeezed his hand once, simple and steady. Calvin Ransom felt present. Summer arrived. Renee Whitfield pushed Niles Whitfield in a stroller through a small park in Camden, watching families, watching sunlight on leaves, watching ordinary life continue. She felt invisible, but she also felt real. She had no illusion of deserving a second chance. She had simply created one through daily responsibility. She worked, saved, and learned to cook cheap meals. She learned how to smile again without performing. When people asked about the father, she answered, it's just me. She stopped explaining. She stopped defending. Her life was not a story to argue about. It was a reality to manage. Some nights, she scrolled through old photos on her phone and saw Calvin Ransom's face. She did not feel anger anymore. She felt regret sharpen into clarity. She understood she had traded long-term stability for short-term thrill. She understood she had tried to game a system and been outplayed by someone who understood systems better than she did. She understood the irony, and she understood that irony did not change her responsibility. She was a mother now. Responsibility was no longer optional. Calvin Ransom and Sienna Brooks attended another networking event in Philadelphia, where a colleague introduced them as a couple. Calvin Ransom did not correct it. He noticed that the word couple did not feel like a trap anymore. Later, walking down Walnut Street, Sienna Brooks asked, "Do you think you could ever marry again?" Calvin Ransom paused, then answered in a way that surprised him. "I don't know," he said, "but I know I could trust again if trust is earned." Sienna Brooks nodded. "That's all anyone can ask," she said. Calvin Ransom fell calm. He realized the biggest difference between now and 6 months ago was not his finances. It was his sense of self. He no longer felt like he had to monitor life for betrayal. He had boundaries now. He had proof that he could survive dishonesty. That knowledge was power he carried quietly. One afternoon, Calvin Ransom received an email from the pregnancy support center he had donated to months earlier, thanking him for his contribution and noting that donations had helped provide supplies for new parents in Camden and North Philadelphia. Calvin Ransom read it, then closed the message. He did not imagine Renee Whitfield receiving those supplies. He did not hope she did. He simply accepted that helping was separate from forgiving. He could do good without reopening wounds. That evening, he and Sienna Brooks cooked dinner together in his kitchen. She asked him to show her how he organized his spice rack, teasing him. Calvin Ransom laughed, surprised by how easy it came. Sienna Brooks smiled. "There it is," she said. "The human stuff." Calvin Ransom shook his head, amused. "It's a work in progress," he said. Sienna Brooks replied, "Progress is enough." Calvin Ransom looked around his home and recognized something important. His life was no longer shaped by Renee Whitfield's betrayal. It was shaped by his choices after it. That was freedom. Renee Whitfield, late at night in Camden, rocked Niles Whitfield back to sleep. She stared at the small apartment, at the baby supplies stacked in a corner, at the laundry basket, at the bills taped to the fridge. This was her reality. She did not glamorize it. She did not dramatize it. She lived it. She thought about the night Calvin Ransom read her message aloud, the words she had typed carelessly with a sense of entitlement. She felt shame burn again, but she did not run from it. She accepted it as a reminder of who she could become if she stopped paying attention. She whispered to her sleeping baby, "I will not lie to you." She did not know whether she deserved a promise, but she promised anyway, because motherhood was full of promises people did not deserve and had earned. In the quiet, she finally understood the true bill was not measured in dollars or deposits. It was measured in the person she had been and the person she had to become now. Calvin Ransom sat in his office one evening, looking at the spot where the evidence folder had once been. The space was empty now, and he felt no urge to refill it. He opened his laptop and reviewed his goals for the next year. Work targets, health targets, travel plans with Sienna Brooks. He noticed Renee Whitfield's name did not appear anywhere. He did not need to force it out. It had simply stopped belonging in his future. He remembered how he once believed love could be maintained purely through stability, through provision. He understood now that stability without honesty was fragile. He also understood that his own coldness could become a prison if he clung to it. He closed the laptop and went upstairs, where Sienna Brooks was reading on the couch. She looked up and smiled. Calvin Ransom sat beside her, quiet and present. He did not need revenge anymore. He needed peace, and he was building it. Renee Whitfield returned to work after maternity leave, carrying exhaustion like weight in her shoulders. She balanced daycare schedules and deadlines, and she learned to keep moving even when she felt broken. At the end of one long day, she picked up Niles Whitfield and walked home through humid air. She passed a bank and saw people inside signing papers. She felt a flash of memory, signing documents without reading, trusting someone because it was easier than paying attention. She stopped on the sidewalk, holding her baby closer, and stared at the building as if it were a warning sign. She understood that her old self had wanted life to be easy. Her current life was not easy, but it was honest. That honesty was something she could build on. She walked home, unlocked her door, and stepped into her small apartment. She fed her baby, paid her bills, and slept. There was no dramatic redemption. There was only daily responsibility, and for the first time, she did not run from it. Calvin Ransom and Sienna Brooks planned a weekend trip to Boston, a simple drive, a quiet hotel, museums and coffee and long conversations. Calvin Ransom felt a steady contentment he had not felt in years. Not excitement, not chaos, not performance, just steadiness. In Camden, Renee Whitfield sat at her table with Niles Whitfield asleep nearby and wrote a budget in neat columns. She calculated rent, childcare, food, and savings. She understood now that numbers were not cold. They were clarity. She had once treated Calvin Ransom's clarity as something to exploit, and she had paid for it. Calvin Ransom had once treated love as something that could survive without truth, and he had learned the hard way it could not. Their lives moved forward on separate tracks, each shaped by what they had chosen. Renee Whitfield did not get a second chance with him. Calvin Ransom did not get back the version of himself before betrayal. But both of them lived with the reality they created. Renee Whitfield signed the page and felt the choice disappear entirely right then, too. If this ending hits you, don't click away. Watch the next story now, because the next husband doesn't raise his voice either. And what he does instead is even colder. The end.